This week, Ron Gula, the president of Gula Tech Adventures, joins us for a segment called the RSA Pregame. Joff Thayer will deliver the technical segment titled Got Privs, Extract and Crack the Creds. In the security news this week, RTF bug finally gets patched. So many ways to bridge an air gap, attacking accountants, spoofing all the ports, and troll cave. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. I'm, of course, your host, Paul Asadorian, excited to be here, as always, on Paul's Security Weekly.
Hi, and welcome to the show. I totally introduced our host right now, but I've got a totally awkward boner.
What? Where? Oh, hey! I'm in the studio with you guys. That's kind of cool.
Sounds like a plan.
And we'll at least have one person listening.
That's right. Just saying.
Yeah, I know, and I appreciate it, and I'm glad you enjoyed your spooning with Jeff. But you know,
hey, that's actually built a new office.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, third baby on the way, so I needed a new office.
Nice.
I lost my old office. That's now the baby room.
Brought to you by
NetSparker, the developers of desktop and cloud-based web application security scanners that enable you to automatically identify vulnerabilities in your web applications and web services. NetSparker scanners employ a unique and dead-accurate vulnerability scanning engine that automatically verifies vulnerabilities with their proof of concept. For more information, visit them on the web at netsparker.com or email at contact@netsparker.com. In 2017, an increasing number of companies reported they did not have effective insider threat detection methods. Logarithm's UEBA solutions enable you to detect and neutralize user-based threats in real time, while built-in scenario and behavior-based analytics empower you to expose insider threats, compromised accounts, and privilege misuse. Visit logarithm.com to learn how their UEBA solutions can help you expand visibility and enhance detection capabilities.
Hello, and welcome to the show. But first, let me introduce you to my good friend, Paul Asadorian.
Welcome, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Larry is,
You didn't let me finish!
Larry's in 50% speed.
He's a man who sounds better at half speed after you've had too much coconut oil.
Yes. A listener recently wrote in and accidentally was listening to our show in 50% speed and highly is recommending that everyone do that for the laws, really. And so we went back and listened and
To that specific show that he recommended.
that specific show. And it was really funny. So
I literally laughed so hard I cried.
you know, some people listen at half speed, normal speed, or double speed, you know, whatever your speed is. As long as you listen, that's fine.
Yep.
That's fine. So we have a lot of people to introduce. I'll start from my left, who we have a very special guest in studio. Mr. Ron Gula is here with us. Ron, welcome.
Hey, Paul, how's it going?
It's going good. It's going good. And we got a lot of hosts on this show. So we'll move right along. Mr. Larry Pesci, of course,
That I
is
am.
here with us in studio.
That I am.
And then on the lines via Skype, I'll start from left to right in my view of the world, as it were. Mr. Joff Thayer is here with us. Joff, welcome.
who, me? Oh,
Yes, you.
G'day. How are you? Yeah, good to see everybody.
Awesome. Not Kevin is here. Welcome, Not Kevin.
Thank you, Paul.
Jason Wood makes an appearance through Paul's Security Weekly. Jason, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Coming at you from the Japanese massage parlor. Mr. Keith Hoodlet is here as well. Keith, welcome.
Good day, Paul. Hi, how's it going?
And none other than Jeff Mann. Jeff, welcome.
Thanks, Paul.
Now, Jeff will be at the RSA show, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Just a quick announcement before we get started. The webcast with Distill Networks, 9 ways to protect your business from bots. And the bot report will be held Wednesday, April 25th. Register now at securityweekly.com/distill networks. Myself and John Strand will be talking about web application security at the beginning, and kind of this alphabet soup of how you protect or try to protect your web applications, RASP, DAST, IAST, all of those things. We'll briefly cover all that. And basically all of that, I feel, doesn't protect you from the bots or allow you to look at your web traffic without all of that noise from bots. Distill Networks will talk about their bad bot report and offer some not only commercial ways but free ways as well to protect your websites from bad bots. So make sure you do that registration thing at securityweekly.com/distill networks. And Ron, you wanted to talk about RSA.
There's this conference coming up in like a couple days.
It's
a
like
lot of people are going.
It's a pretty big deal, right?
It's a big deal.
I think I've heard of this before.
How many years have you been attending RSA, Ron?
I skipped a couple years ago, but I've been going for about 10, 12 years.
Oh my gosh.
I guess the next question is, how has RSA, the conference itself, changed? Is that even an interesting talking point?
It's tough because there's so many new people that are getting into the business that it's good for them to go and kind of get immersed with the talks and, you know, the vendors and the parties. And it's a lot like high school, right? Are you going to this party? Are you going to that party? And you can't come and whatnot.
Only the cool kids get into this party.
Exactly. So if you're going,
it really is like high school.
Yep.
And in high school, sorry, may I interject?
Yes, please do.
In high school, there was always like a central meeting place like McDonald's to go find out where the party was. At RSA, it's the W lobby.
Good to know. I thought it was email because I get emails inviting.
There you go.
To all those parties.
You get all the emails. Would you like to set up an interview with?
We get a lot of those emails. Jeff will be doing some interviews while we're out there. But
And in fact, PSW got an invite for Jeff Mann today.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
That's really funny. So, Ron, is RSA more today more about vendors networking with each other and other similar vendors and or marketing companies or analyst firms, right? Or is it more about interfacing with the end user, the end consumer of products, or both? And how do those interactions kind of take place?
Yeah, from a vendor point of view, a lot of people go out, they try to have a booth, and they try to get customers and try to get their message when they're going out. And it's tough to do because if you haven't been to RSA, it's sort of like going to the mall where every mall store is selling very similar things. Compliance, risk framework, incident response, agents. And it's really difficult to kind of figure out what's going on. If you go back,
there won't be any endpoint security vendors.
There'll be tons of endpoint, compliance, SaaS. It's a lot
identity.
of fun. It keeps going. It keeps going. And it's a hard thing for vendors to do because you want to differentiate. So if there's a lot of innovation going on, but there's also a lot of people sort of making a better mousetrap. If you have a mousetrap, do you really need a better, mousetrap after that? So there's a lot of that going on. And then companies go through phases. They launch, they come out as stealth, they get fundraising, they get acquired, they go public. They're public. They might acquire somebody.
Friends in high school. They go through
friends
phases.
at high school. They go to phases, and that's what's going on. And every year it gets a little bit bigger. The parties get a little bit more out of control and a little bit more numerous. And outside of that vendor thing, there's still security talks and people are giving panels and briefings, and there's pre-launch parties, and there's even conferences before and after RSA. So it's a very, very big deal.
And awards dinners?
There's awards dinners. It's if you're walking around the streets Monday or Tuesday night, people are going to like the SC awards dinner, and they dress up for that. Tuxedos.
It's like a black tie.
Black tie, black tie.
I almost went to that event.
You don't have a black tie?
Well, I did, and then I hurt my knee, and then I couldn't go. I don't know if you remember that story.
And the party that's near and dear to our heart, the Social Security Awards.
Yeah,
from the Security Bloggers Network.
I forgot about that actually until Jeff reminded us today. He's like, "Hey, isn't there an awards thing?"
Yeah, and you know what? I could never find a link to be able to go vote.
Yeah, so we found it today.
So I think we need to share that with our listeners.
I mean, we should. I don't have the link handy, but maybe in the next segment or something.
Yeah.
If the voting is still open, I'm assuming that it is. But
it's easier to drop it in the show notes.
Yeah.
Yep. surveymonkey.com/r/SBN Awards 2018.
I think we're nominated for 2 awards this year.
We
this
are.
might be the first year ever.
Entertaining blog and security podcast.
Yeah.
Good luck.
So double nomination. That's actually a pretty good milestone for us. We've never been nominated for more than one thing in the awards, so that's pretty cool. Even if we don't win anything, I can still say that we were nominated twice for 2 different ones.
Multi-award winning, multi-nomination,
international
award-winning.
known
International award-winning.
On the microphone.
Multiply nominated.
Yes.
That sounds good.
And it's funny because people give out these awards, and I don't know anybody who says, I want to buy a new security widget. Let me go figure out who the award category winners are and start with them. And same thing with podcasts. I don't know if people are going to start listening because you win an award. So it's kind of one of these industry recognition things that we all go to, but at the same time, it doesn't really mean that much.
Yeah, I can certainly see that. And we check the press releases for all the security vendors, and anytime a security vendor is either nominated or wins any type of award, that seems to be like an automatic default, like in their automation processes, issue press release.
One category I kind of like, RSA has a Innovator Sandbox, and if you get nominated for that, that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah,
a lot of people come by, check that out.
Yeah, there's a you had to qualify to get in the final presentations for this year's what do they call it? Innovation
Sandbox.
Innovation Sandbox.
Yeah,
is that what they call it? Yeah. But there's like a Shark Tank kind of judging happening, and the finalists will be presenting an RSA, and they each get like 15 minutes to give their pitch. So that's pretty cool. Well, other than attending one of those events, what recommendations do you have for the companies you invest in, Ron, to be able to stand out at RSA?
Yeah, so RSA has a long history of having a sort of a pre-conference ahead of that called the AGC. It's usually Monday the week before. And if you're new to security or new to cyber and you're into business development, maybe do acquisitions, investments, that sort of thing, you really want to go to that because you'll see pre-IPO companies all the way to companies coming out of stealth coming in and presenting. And it's really interesting to see all these companies come in and talk at the same time. A lot of times you'll see competing companies present, after each other. It's kind of interesting to see how they react to each other. And then you'll also see companies and they might not talk about 100% of their roadmap because they're going to announce that they're being acquired tomorrow, right? Because they planned this like 4 months ago. So it's interesting to see some of those things really live.
As a enterprise customer or really any business that is looking for a security solution, what recommendations do you have? Well, first, I guess if you're attending the event and you're going to go visit the show floor, maybe attend some talks, like how do you navigate a show floor, and what should you be looking for?
Yeah, so if you're a Fortune 2000 sort of company and you're in IT security, you're probably inundated every day with salespeople who call you and want you to buy their product. And those same people have probably invited you at meetings at RSA that are not necessarily on the floor, although you will see some booths where there's meetings in the booth. But one of the things we did,
they have the towers. They have multiple meeting rooms.
Exactly.
In the booth, yeah.
And like how Jeff mentioned the W, you'll see hotels all around RSA. You'll see people going to and from them, and they're not necessarily going back to their rooms. They're doing private meetings. And those private meetings are really interesting. Maybe you're just touching base with the customer. You're getting really good feedback. So it's not necessarily a selling situation. You're talking about your new roadmap, getting some direct feedback. You're having a conversation that you don't really want to have on the RSA floor. Because frankly, if you're at the booth, you never know who's going to be listening. It could be the media, it could be a competitor, it could be a competing investor, and so you got to kind of watch sometimes when you're on the floor.
I remember a particular Black Hat show. You were in like a fish tank the whole time. It was like glass doors, and there was Ron and others from Tenable having meetings with people, and we got to look in like a fish tank.
Well, it's funny if you look at different companies that have been in the past and had certain people coming to their booth hand over hand. I go back about 5 or 6 years. You had NetWitness. NetWitness had this huge sort of Minority Report billboard, and they were sniffing packets and converting them to PDF documents and pornography pretty much right there. That got a lot of people. And then you had a year or two ago, you had Cylance pretty much calling out Symantec, doing live hacking demos, how they would detect malware and not Symantec. So I think every company's trying to go for something like that, and it's very interesting because those kind of moments can be very effective.
Right. Yes. Right. So going back to your investments, like how do they stand out? Going to obviously you can do direct comparisons to your competitors' products. I don't know if I'd necessarily recommend that as a strategy, but like you're in the innovation sandbox and you want people the right people to come to your booth. What do you want to tell our audience about what they might look for a company that's doing it right to go visit them?
So if somebody's walking the floor and they have a budget and they're shopping for a certain widget, I mean, RSA is probably the worst place to go to do that, because they're going to get inundated with startups and maybe big companies that have coming out with features that kind of do something. So it can be really tough. RSA is a great place to go to understand the market and the trends and that. But for specific companies, a company that's doing it really well, for example, is StackRox. They were going to go into, there's a startup sort of expo outside of that sandbox, and they actually moved. They kind of knew they were going to make a bigger splash, so they moved to the floor. They just announced that they raised a $25 million round, and they're one of these RSA innovating sandbox companies. So that's a really good example of a company that's making a really good first big splash. Now, not every company that we work with can go out and raise $25 million in a couple of years. So what do? You can get a booth, you can do private meetings. There's a whole combination of different things. It really depends on the go-to-market and how much they want to sort of embrace the people who are attending RSA.
What categories in security, if you're walking the show floor, in your opinion, are the ones that we should pay attention to? Maybe some of the newer categories that are emerging.
I think right now there's been a big reemergence in risk management. And when I say risk management, I'm not talking about audit and compliance. I'm actually talking about people who are trying to really compute my risk level, put a number on it, put a dollar value on it, which controls are effective and not effective. And that's going to allow me to manage my network a little more interesting. The problem with that space is it's really there's a lot of smoke and mirrors. Are you doing it with questionnaires? Are you doing it with third-party data? Are you doing it with integrations from stuff you already have? Tenable, Qualys, that kind of thing, SIMs, and it's very interesting because there's a lot of progress in this space, but there's also a lot of silicon snake oil. So when you're walking the floor and somebody says we manage your risk, your first real question should be, how do you do it? What changed after the day after Spectre? For example, and if they don't have good answers for that, it's probably more snake oil. But there's a lot of people doing some very, very innovative things right now.
I think a lot of our community looks at that as pretty boring stuff. There's not a lot of packets involved. I don't get to hack anything, scan anything.
There aren't enough free drinks.
It might be a little bit boring, but we haven't solved that problem of how do you communicate to the board? How do you communicate to your supply chain? What's a good risk level? And because doing it the way you're supposed to do it, actual auditing, understanding everything, doing this cybersecurity framework, all that kind of stuff, people don't have the funds and time and resources to do that, so they want to take shortcuts. And I'm really hoping that we're going to figure this out. And I'm not saying we're going to do it this year, but look for companies in that space.
Well, I think it hits on a point that we've talked about on the show a lot, and that's when you complete a pen test and you deliver the report. I mean, basically, most of the reports I'd imagine that Larry and others write, like you could probably just summarize them in like you're screwed, right? But what Ron's talking about is having more of a formula to measure how screwed you are.
Right,
right.
Yeah, and a lot of those risk frameworks kind of deliver the same thing. You're screwed, right? But the question is what do I care about, and how can I fix that? There's sort of another category that emerged called automated breach simulation. This is companies like Veridin, ThreatCare, Marcus Carries, and I really like this because it doesn't test everything. It just says, hey, I walk into the SOC, I put evil.pdf down on a random host. I don't care what your religion is. Do you have Carbon Black? Do you have Tanium? Do you have something OS query? Hey, did you find it? No. Oh, you didn't find it? You got some work to do, right? And that improves things without going through this huge audit. Now, you didn't test everything, but it's very effective, and I really like that.
How do you, and you're hitting on a point, I think on purpose too, how do you see that integrating with pen testing? How do you see the two fields? And I think Adrian Santabria certainly kind of pointed some things out, basically calling out saying, well, pen testing's dead, we should do more of attack simulation. Do you see the two coexisting in the future? Do you see them crossing paths? Do you see them going down different paths?
Yeah, they definitely, I don't think it's dead. There's a lot of pen testing going on. What changes is the pen test who comes in, let's just say once a year, once every 90 days, you're not effective enough to make a change in the culture, the technology, the executive decisions. Whereas when you have something like the breach simulation, you really can detect the first day that the span port goes down because your DLP stops sending alerts. And that's a really big deal because nobody else is looking for that stuff. Yes, you can do an audit with Nessus. Yes, you can do an audit and see things. Yes, you can set alerts, but nobody really does. And so that's why I really like that space. It increases the efficacy and efficiency of your network security stack by tremendous amounts.
Others?
So I need to ask a question.
Go ahead, Jeff.
And this is for the benefit of our listening audience. Ron, you keep mentioning audit, and I keep thinking you mean assessment. Can you at least define your terms, what you mean by audit in this context?
Can I take a drink first?
Yeah,
sure.
Please do.
And Jeff brings up a great point. So without actually answering his question, doing politics 101 here, a lot of organizations out there drinking 101,
Have
right?
11, yep.
Looks a little wrinkly there, I think, right?
Yes. Getting old.
A lot of people think they have both. So if you do an assessment, you do an audit, you know, there's a lot of people who do them interchangeably. And I hear both. I even use them interchangeably. I think of an assessment as I come in and I do a specific goal. I assess the security of a web server. I assess the security of source code. But, you know, when I think about an audit, I'm auditing against some sort of defined policy. You know, I'm going to audit against PCI. I'm going to audit against risk management framework. I'm going to audit against some sort of standard versus an assessment. I can go, hey, Paul, I think that's
PCI from drinking.
Right. Well, oh, very good.
I said 27,001.
I could say that, hey, your shirt, it's a little tight up in the top, you know, and there's no standard, you know, but so I think audits
is more like an observation.
Yeah, it's really, and that's sort of the problem. Since there's no baseline for that stuff, hey, I did an assessment of your server, you're good to go. Really? Okay, versus some sort of audit against a standard. So what were you getting at, Jeff?
Well, no, you're touching on what I wanted you to get at, which is audit by definition is you're measuring against some sort of defined measuring stick, whereas an assessment is more of well, let's just take a look at how things are and point out things that are really bad and maybe prioritize some good, bad, and ugly, but maybe not. Maybe you're not seeing anything. And at the end of the day, like you said, how do you know if you're any better or worse if you're not measuring to some specific measuring stick?
Yeah, well said. And as you're walking around the RSA floor and somebody says, we help with your assessments, we help keep you secure, we help keep you compliant, we automate the audit process, you really got to ask against what are your target? How do you know it's working?
How do you do it?
How do you do it? How do you make it exciting? How do you make it change my culture? And that's where a lot of the stuff falls down. There's a lot of great tech that really is interesting that nobody ever uses in the enterprise. That's why we're still using Tableau and Excel spreadsheets and you know, antiquated GRC systems.
So thinking about, you know, what makes up RSA and, you know, the things that we've preached for many years on this show is that, you know, a box with blinking lights doesn't solve all your problems. And to me, it always seemed like RSA was the demonstration of the latest blinking lights. You know, how do those two don't play very well together? The thing we've talked about. So, someone that's listened to this show for so many years, how would you suggest someone approach a problem like that?
To try to sell a product at RSA or a solution,
or buy a product at RSA.
So
find a product.
It's interesting. Again, going to RSA, what are you trying to do? Sure. If you buy a booth, you have a room maybe about this big, and you have people walking by. So the question is how do you drive people to your booth? And that's a marketing problem. You know, maybe I can come on the Security Weekly show and do a podcast and do a webinar and drive people to my my webinar. Maybe I'm going to give away something.
Better question is, how do you get the right people?
The right people, absolutely.
Recognize the right people at the booth. That's something that I'm still struggling with.
It's a really tough decision, and I have a lot of companies who, hey, we're just not going to go to RSA. We're not ready for that. I'll give you a good example. So one of the companies we invested in is called Polarity. You have to kind of see what they do to really understand it. But basically, they do this overlay system on your desktop where they recognize IOCs, IP addresses, DNS, and it really pops up and it says, hey, that's MaxMind, hey, that's VirusTotal, hey, this is an integration with Anomaly or Farsight or something like that. Once people see it, they go, holy cow, that's awesome.
One of the founders is a long-time Security Weekly listener.
They're brilliant. These guys are awesome. Trying to describe that, if you have this high-level message, it comes up with memory augmentation for SOC analysts. Are you looking for a memory augmentation for SOC analysts?
Nope.
So it's a hard thing to do. So how do you get people like that into your booth? So one of the things they did is they said, we're going to do a game. We're going to show you a hash, right? One of these long hashes. You get a chance to memorize it. And if you can, you get to go for their drone. Otherwise, by the way, when they flash it up in their demo, not only was the hash there, but they featured all their partners, Reversing Labs, Farsight, and stuff like that. So they had people coming into the booth, got the product, got the concept, featured all their partners. That's a good way of getting that. Now they didn't. They're doing something like that at RSA this year. They did this at Black Hat last year. It was very, very effective.
I thought they were going to do the hot wing eating thing.
They're probably going to do that too. That's fun too.
They won't do that at the booth though.
No, a hot wing
That
for
would be
everybody.
fun.
I don't think a lot of people at RSA eating hot wings would be a good thing.
Probably not.
No.
Yeah. You're
No.
probably right. You're probably right.
Yeah, the bathrooms are already preoccupied.
So,
But just hold on, Jeff. I want to dovetail off Larry's question and just talk about everyone on the RSA show floor is trying to help prevent or detect problems. And one of the kind of words of wisdom that you've instilled on me is like, why don't people just go fix the problems? And so, you founded Tenable. We worked together at Tenable. Our job was to find the problems of the network. And we spent, some companies I feel like spin a lot of cycles and wheels talking about the problems, putting Band-Aids and buying other blinky boxes like Larry was saying. And why don't we just fix the problems? And a lot of times that's like applying a patch and writing secure code and putting secure configuration. Why don't we just do that?
Well, the problem is people do that, right? And people like Equifax did a lot of that, and it still didn't work. So there's a lot of people doing next-gen stuff, right? Killing applications that are hard to manage and going to the cloud, going to SaaS apps, making it somebody else's problem. Refactoring old proprietary applications with Docker, with containers and microservices, right? But all of those things are taking a lot of different time. And what that does, it actually adds to the fray at RSA. So now with each of these new technologies, right? Serverless security, containers, next gen of mobile, cloud infrastructure and whatnot. There's actually security problems with every one of those things. So you'll see security products specific to those new areas that are trying to fix this problem.
What was the serverless one? Did you invest in serverless?
We invested in a company called Protego that hooks into your Amazon Lambda and identifies all your categories, all your different APIs.
I caught a news article from one of the competitors that sounded like it did exactly the same thing.
That's the issue with RSA. So I like to tell people, remember the NIST cybersecurity framework, remember all the different things you have to protect, and try to figure out when you're talking to a vendor, where do they fit kind of in that. It gives you some decent perspective.
Sorry, Joff, you had a question?
I've almost forgotten it now, but let me try. The thought that was going around in my head is pertaining to other shows that we've done, and that is the ever-persistent problem in the information security community of trying to bridge the gap between what we know well, which is all of the information security problems at a very technical level, and how that maps over to actual business risk and speaking the language of executives and board members. Do you think RSA fills that gap at any level, Ron? And I suppose as an additional question, do you think we're getting any better at it in the industry?
So we're definitely getting better at it. But let's say you're a new board member for a public company, and you have no background. Maybe you're a pilot and you're a board member for like American Airlines or something. And all of a sudden you're the cyber dude for your board, and you parachute into RSA and you walk through the vendor floor. That's going to be a horrible experience, right? We're not going to do a good job helping that person, making a risk. And if they read all the news stories about cyber, we're not going to do a good job there. If they read all of the cyber board stuff that they read in the audit magazine, and the actual, when I say audit in this case, the financial audit, right? Sarbanes-Oxley, that kind of stuff. That's tough as well. So the best thing you can do is sort of get with your CSO peer groups and your CIO peer groups and have that conversation there. Now, some companies are that's a very coveted area. A lot of vendors try to intrude into that. I haven't seen a whole lot of companies kind of break into that area, except for companies perhaps like CyberGRX, right? That's founded by a bunch of high-end CSOs from Fortune 20s who are trying to solve some of that problem by auditing third-party risks. And I think you've had Fred on the show.
Fred, what's his last name?
You're putting me on the spot.
I pronounced it when I had him on the show.
Yes.
Fred from CyberGRX.
Yes.
There is an episode of, I don't know if it was Startup or Business Security Weekly at the time, but we did interview Fred. And it's one you should go back and listen. And Ron and I have been talking a lot about that space today. So, and Fred's name comes up. So I encourage our listeners to go, check that out.
Yeah, and for those who... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Well, it seems to me like that space continually we come back to. It's sort of ripe for... I keep thinking of the word exploitation, but it's ripe for some of us with the technical know-how and the business maturity to step up and start filling that area a little bit more, because ultimately I think it's going to funnel more of the market into the technologies that a lot of us are promoting and a lot of us are working on. And I think we're in many ways our own worst advocate in that respect, because we get geeky and we kind of shy away from it. So it's an interesting area.
Yeah, there's two problems with that space. So the first problem is instrumentation. So if you're an airplane, a pilot, you have all the instruments in front of you that you know exactly how your airplane. There's no like third wing that you're not getting a flap setting for, right?
Right.
But when it comes to cyber, it keeps changing all the time.
Drink.
So
everybody drink.
Okay.
Oh, we're drinking on cyber.
By the way, Paul, that was the second. I mean, Ron, that was the second time you said cyber. So
I'll drink twice in a second, as long as I don't put. Can I put the alcohol directly into my mic? No, it's good.
Yeah, we've got an IV that we can roll into the room.
Absolutely.
So the problem with cyber is even, and I had this issue at Tenable, right? We had ways to passively listen to the network traffic, passive DNS, log scanning, agents, cloud integrations. And, you know, if I walked into a customer who could get 50 to 80% of the network, I was happy. Most people were happy with like an uncredentialed, you know, Nessus scan. Hey, I got a lot of data. That's too much. So the instrumentation problem is a really big deal. Now, the second problem is, how do you then talk to your employees? You have to do self-assessment questionnaires. Hey, Paul, did you patch all your systems?
I think so. The
That's
ones I
yes.
knew about.
Yep.
Did you patch all your systems?
Yes.
Okay, so we're 100% patched here at Security Weekly, and that's the issue when you're.
And Ron, we had a conversation about this before. The answer is no.
Yeah, it's
right, right. So so then you do the self-assessment questionnaires, and you could do it within the NIST cybersecurity framework, with PCI, with Center for Internet Security, and that's actually a good thing, because you can inform people of policy. You do have a record. It's not a bad thing. But both of those two things are kind of like the blind men in the room looking at the elephant. You kind of get a sense of what's on your network, but you still don't have that good of what's going on. And until we solve that problem, we're never going to then really have an accurate way to talk to the board about what's on the network.
The interesting question that's posed to me, Ron, along these lines is, and some people quote higher numbers. They're like, I believe we're getting 98% of what's on our network, and we are missing that 2%. But now, in hearing you talk about it, like, how do you even know what you're missing if it's something that you're missing?
Yeah, and that's the big problem. We saw this a lot with Tenable, just the active Nessus scans versus passive discovery. Oh, and by the way, we didn't even talk about the cloud. You say on the network. Well, does that include Salesforce? Does that include my users when they're home? Do they access the network from BYOD? And until you have the ability to answer all that and make that stuff, it's really difficult to do. And this is where the DoD and the government has a big advantage. When they have, hey, it's a closed network, there's tons of policies, people say they hate they work in the government. Well, they, by default, they're actually a lot more secure, especially when you start realizing the buildings might be Tempest tested, the phone lines tested. They actually take security a lot more serious.
Their constraints allow security to be easier, because
yes.
there are natural constraints that allow you to actually discover everything that's happening.
Absolutely. And I like to point that out, because the government gets a bad rap with OPM, with some of the breaches that have occurred. But the reality is that they take security a lot more serious than what I've seen in the commercial world.
And it sounds like at RSA there's a lot of, there's maybe 4 domains of things you can buy, right? There's the things that will allow you to get more visibility. There's the things that will allow you to test whether your tools that should be giving you visibility are. There are the things that will augment your team in terms of taking some of that workload away. And I imagine there's probably a 4th one, which is maybe helping you know what you actually have, so that you can start detecting problems on that space. Is that kind of a good coverage of maybe, depending on where your organization is and the maturity of your organization, you have to determine, how much staff do I have, and do I have enough man hours in the day to actually buy this next tool and maintain it, versus test the tools I already have with this other thing that I'm purchasing. What do you think about that, Ron, in terms of like how should companies assess what's even worth starting to look at, let alone the space that it's in?
I think that's a good overview. I like to talk about things, because people ask me a lot, hey, how do I know if I'm secure? And I say, look, just start off with compliance. You have to do it. So if you have to be PCI, don't fret about it. Just do it, and do it well. If you have to be compliant with a certain type of standard, just do it. But the next level up from that, because PCI might not include your whole network, probably it's going to be a very small percentage of it.
2 drinks for PCI.
Oh, wow. All right. All right, I'm keeping a tab.
I need another drink.
I'm the guest, so I can keep talking.
Yes, I'm going with 4 drinks.
But then the next level is pick a framework. NIST cybersecurity framework, SANS, the list you just came up with, but have some sort of plan to figure out what you have. And it's everything from assets all the way to recovery if you're NIST cybersecurity framework. And then you have that conversation with your management people, and you make sure that they're understanding the risks that you're leaving on the table. And then the next level is to improve upon that. So whatever you do, see if you can do it cheaper, see if you can do it better, see if you can do it quicker. But you shouldn't be worrying about those things until you have coverage on everything in that second part. And most companies are flirting around with, hey, how close are we with these frameworks?
I want to hit on Keith's last point.
So,
well, I think hold on, Jeff. I'll get to you next, I promise. So, when we talk about discovering your assets, but there's a discovery of the asset, identification, and then management of those assets. And what Keith was describing was kind of like the last piece. Like I want to keep doing that and then feeding it into my process. But if you're walking the RSA show floor, and your goal is, I want to know about what's on my network. I want to discover my assets. I want to identify them and manage them. What tools do we have available? What should I be looking for? What should my evaluation criteria be?
That's a great question. I should just drink right now.
Cyber PCI?
Cyber PCI?
That's right. That's right. So the issue is what kind of budget do you have? Are you JP Morgan? Are you Citibank? Or are you my dentist office, who basically outsources their IT to the lowest cost managed services provider who uses something like ConnectWise and the cheapest combination of authentication and antivirus and firewalls that they can possibly manage. It still applies to those people the same way as applies to to these banks and these big organizations. And if you have somebody like a marketing team, the stereotypical marketing team who's stood up this e-commerce site or some sort of web survey thing outside of your processes, how do you detect that?
Right. Like even if you turn DHCP off in the network, you still have those issues because of cloud and mobile laptops and MDMs. Well, wait, Ron didn't really answer the question. Ron did his...
Well, no, it gets worse.
It was a Jedi mind trick.
If you, you look at some of these big companies like who are actually that they own like 100 other properties where they have a budget and they have an IT, but these 100 other companies have their own brands and their own some shared. It becomes really difficult to figure out who's doing what for who. And then you start saying, well, what about my third-party suppliers?
Right.
What do I do when my certs in the cloud go down, or my sharing in the cloud goes down, or my box.net that goes down? So it becomes very difficult.
So there's more than one solution that you need to look for to get a handle on what you have, right? Because there's software as a service, there's cloud infrastructure, there's what's internal, there's mobile, and then there's what employees will do just naturally kind of roaming around, collecting more assets, more software, more devices.
And think of it this way. If you think of NIST cybersecurity framework where you have
Jeff's hand waving.
Asset discovery, detect, protect, and whatnot. There's a lot of products in the detect category. And do you really need a third, fourth, or fifth product there? I'm really wondering what Jeff has to say.
Yeah, all right, let's go to Jeff.
So I wanted to double back a little bit on what Ron was saying, and he sort of got to what I was going to point out was it's great to start with compliance and move on to something else. My question was going to be, but how do you motivate companies to do anything else? They usually are bitching and complaining that they spent what they did just to do PCI. I will interject that Ron said move on to a framework. I think, to clarify, PCI is supposed to look at your whole network. PCI industry has allowed customers to segment out and isolate what are supposedly PCI systems. But by definition, out of the box, the standard is to look at your whole network. So I propose that it could be treated as a framework. So a variation of what Ron was saying is do PCI because you have to, and so many companies need to, but don't just do the bare minimum of PCI looking at certain subsystems. Look at PCI as a framework for all your systems, and I think you're that much better off. And to Paul's point or question, you want to discover all your assets. But my question then is, okay, so you run something and you discover a whole lot of stuff that you didn't know about. And to Ron's point, you include things like the cloud, or you include BYOD devices. My immediate questions then is, how do you know if what you discovered is legitimate or not? So you've discovered like a whole lot more, but so, what do you do? You still have to go back to some sort of framework to decide what's business relevant, what are you going to allow, what are you not going to allow, then do your discovery and measure it back to what you, in theory, think you're supposed to have, which, by the way, is also required by PCI.
I definitely agree with Jeff in that PCI is a framework, and I always like to throw that out because I say, SAN, Center for Internet Security, NIST, PCI, and I'll get groans from the audience, and it is definitely a framework. But at the same time,
framework, guideline, standard. Is there a difference?
Those are guidelines and frameworks. There's no, I don't believe there's any standard that says you have to do NIST cybersecurity framework.
Yeah, it would be a standard that would make you implement a framework. Is that the interaction?
I can help answer that in the PCI context, Paul.
Yeah.
PCI does very little in terms of what we would usually think of as a standard, like a CIS hardening guide, telling you exactly how to harden a server or to harden an application or harden whatever.
Or is that a best practice?
PCI says make sure you have a hardening standard for your X, Y, and Z servers and X, Y, and Z applications. So in that sense, the framework is have a standard, have a build standard, have a configuration standard for everything you use. In that sense is what I see it as a framework.
How many vendors will talk about machine learning and AI? And then of that subset, how many are actually doing it correctly that will help you solve a problem?
And how many of them are snake oil and aren't doing machine learning or AI?
So there's really two types of, I think, AI and machine learning applications. So the first one is to come up with
good and bad.
The first one is to come up with rules for stuff we don't know about, right? I get a pile of malware that's bad. I get a pile of whiteware that's good. I train something to find the good and the bad. And we can do that for network traffic. We can do that for domains. We can do that for things. And there's probably a lot of people making progress in that space. You're going to see a lot of that kind of stuff. The second kind, though, leverages some sort of sharing of data. I'm going to look at all the traffic or the telemetry from customer A and customer B and customer C, and I'm going to use an AI to tell customer C about customer A stuff. And that's kind of this holy grail of what controls does Paul have that Larry doesn't, that's making Paul more effective than Larry. We really haven't seen a product in that space come out yet, but a lot of people are working on this. They want to share information about what makes things work better on the network, what makes things more secure on the network, without sort of saying, hey, here's my list of vendors that I've got. So if I go back to the construct of risk management where I said we're going to either take surveys or we're going to do this technical assessment, both of them have limitations. One of the things you can do is you can actually talk to your vendors and not necessarily your specific vendors, but like your resellers. Hey, give me a list of everything I bought that has something to do. And let me see of all those things I bought, what are those things? How do I fill out the NIST cybersecurity framework in that case? And that's a new way to kind of get that kind of data.
More questions for Ron? I had one, but it escaped me. Ron knows, Ron knows when I say that I've forgotten or don't have a question.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Jeff.
It's sort of a variation on what you were just asking in terms of, what are going to be the buzz topics next week at RSA. Given that you've been to 10 or 12 years of RSA conferences, it's a two-part question. How is it that all the vendors know what's the buzz every year, and why? Why are there buzz words and topics every year? Do they really matter? Because we seem to be talking about frameworks and the very basics. Why do we need to care about all the new buzz that's coming out?
Yeah, so the buzz is interesting. So I think the buzz is overhyped. So people have been doing machine learning and AI for a long time, but this year and the last year,
it was a couple of years we did big data.
Big data, like what's the difference between big data and a report versus machine learning and a report?
Yeah.
And if it's packets, why do I need deep packets, to inspect them versus just full packet capture? It definitely comes and goes. The problem is that with RSA, we're talking to ourselves. So we need to have cyber techno babble and look cool and maybe I don't need to have blockchain in that, but I'm going to put some blockchain in that so I look trendy, right?
Can we use
I was wondering when
that's right.
Can we use machine learning and AI to analyze our big data with our deep packet
Yeah.
inspection
In a
delivered
server-
via blockchain.
in a serverless environment.
That's right.
Oh,
That's
damn.
right. That's right.
I think you're right if you leverage your fileless malware with SaaS and big data as a service.
Gotta have WAF. Don't forget that.
But you have
Oh,
to
wow.
search for PII to meet your GDPR requirements.
And you should have a DLP solution to help with that as well.
Big data as a
According
service.
to the
Would that be a
PCI.
badass?
Okay, we've totally lost it now. Like
Service.
back to whatever Ron was saying.
I don't know that there's enough
Sounded
alcohol
really
at this
good.
point in time to.
That pretty
claim
much
for
like, I mean, that's a good assessment of RSA right there. I mean, that's pretty much what you hear if you're on the floor, right? Is all
Yep,
of those
you
buzzwords.
just lost everything in the noise.
Well, that brings up a really interesting point, Ron. With your experience, and maybe you can pass on, what are some telltale signs you could provide to attendees about, finding the signal from the noise when you're looking at all these vendors? There's too many booths to most likely visit every single one. What are your recommendations about figuring out, if you have a split-second decision, what do you look for to figure out, I'm going to spend my time here at this vendor?
The Ferrari.
Well, so the one thing is you got to specialize. So if you're an incident responder, you probably shouldn't be looking a whole lot at cloud, compliance frameworks and that. If you're a network person, maybe you're not going to be an operating system internals, agent kind of person. You want to understand what these companies are doing. So you should do some homework ahead of time. Now, the RSA does a good job of telling you who the vendors are. Most of the vendors who are going to RSA are probably emailing you right now and trying to call you right now. So you should get a sense of what's out there and have some specific questions. Now, maybe you have a vendor that is past its age and, you want to replace it. Maybe there's a vendor where you can get some consolidation. And this is actually something that happens quite a bit. A management decision has been said, we're going to replace all these maybe 6 or 7 vendors with a big vendor, Cisco, CA, IBM. Hey, we're outsourcing to a service. And if you know that kind of thing's coming, maybe you want to go visit that vendor and really try to understand what they're doing. Tell them your concerns. Try to get that private meeting where you can say, hey, look, I think you guys need to do a lot better in, log search speeds or whatever it is you're trying to do. And at the same time, you can learn a tremendous amount by just going to the booth, listening to what other people are asking, looking at the demos, and just seeing, can you describe what that company does? And if you can't, it's probably not a good demo. It's probably not a good pitch.
And as we found, people, vendors struggle with what problem do you solve? That question stumps them a lot of the time. In fact, so often that I almost don't lead in with that question.
And that's actually a good point. So, I've found that most people, you're guys going to love this, most people who go to RSA, I mean, yes, they're there to sell you a product. Yes, they're there to try to tell you about their product. But they're not evil. They're not trying to trick you into.
And I think that's been a stigma that the security industry, I think, has bred that, vendors are evil and they're just trying to sell you stuff and they're trying to cheat you and just take your money, And that's not 100% of the time. That's not true. Right. They're sure that does happen, but I don't think it's the norm.
Yeah. So what I try to tell people is, you might be talking to a salesperson this might be their first RSA. They might be 25, 28 years old. And they're not going to know the differences in PCI and FSMA and the history of things. So give them a break. If you're not getting the answer, don't be bashful. Say, hey, look, I'm really sorry. I need to talk to your technical director. Do you have a CTO here? Do you have somebody from product management? Those are the words you need to say to get to an answer.
I've had vendors take the newer people and put them in front of me, not knowing anything about me or who I am or my experience in the industry. And they're like, oh, you like Jimmy, the new guy, like we're kind of, I can tell they're like totally testing them out and putting them in front of me. And when that happens, I give them the benefit of the doubt. I'm like, dude, I get like, I'm not going to put you through the ringer. Like I want to, and actually when it happened in Boston, the person did a really good job and their team was very energetic and that was very, I looked upon the vendors very positive light because you've got a very energetic team. They're trying to get their new people to, they're really the way that you grow in this industry and learn how to stand at a booth and talk to all these different people is to just go do it, right? So I applauded that vendor for doing that. But to your point, Ron, like if you do encounter someone that is new, like go easy on them. Don't give them a hard time just for the sake of it.
And you have to realize that the industry is really good at talking around certain issues. So it's a cloud product. Okay, is it really an on-premise product that they put into a data center? We have 1,000 ways to say any word other than endpoint. It's a software sensor. It's things like that. So you have to kind of decode some of these messages. I actually got a pitch from a company recently. I went. It was a 10-slide deck. It was a really, really good deck. I thought it was a network product, and it was really an agent. And there was no way to tell. There was no deployment. There was no anything like that. But the results it was getting, it sure looked like a packet product, but it was actually software deployed on agents.
Before I asked the vendors today, and I was actually sharing with you some of our questions that we ask of vendors, right? Before I get into like the solution and the benefits of the solution, and this came from Adrian Santabria, and it was something that I had always known, and he's like, dude, push that question up. So after what problem you solve, tell me about your solution. What is it? Is it an agent? Is it an appliance? Is it a cloud? Like, tell me a little bit about your deployment. That way I can, from a technical sense, and I think it's a good thing for our audience too, from a technical sense, like how does it interact with my environment? Tell me a little bit about the deployment. Now, once I have that foundation of knowledge, okay, now tell me about all the benefits and features and all that other stuff. And I find, thanks to Adrian, that I can make those connections a lot more easily. If the answer to your question, Ron, like, is it an agent? Do I need a passive network tap? Is it in the cloud? Is it on premise? Both? Maybe? Like how is it deployed?
A couple of the good questions you can give vendors. Where is your software made? Are you made outside of the US? That's an interesting discussion. Sometimes they don't like to share that kind of stuff. And I'm not for or against it, but if you don't disclose it, that's kind of an interesting thing. Another one is oh my gosh, I gotta have a drink. I blanked for a second, sorry.
It's all right. I asked them their revenue or their funding or their average deal size, or who are your customers,
who are your competitors.
Yes.
Yeah. And the more advanced companies will actually have customers in the booth. Maybe they'll speak, and those are the ones you want to go to, because if you have a vendor who has a customer come to the booth at RSA, you know that there's something going on. A lot of times these larger organizations, Fortune 2000, Fortune 50, Fortune 20, in order for them to do that, you can't pay them. They have to get approval. There's commitment on that side. So you're probably going to get, a very, very honest answer, assessment of what the product actually does, how they use it.
Or the better question for them, right, is why did you buy it? What was the one thing that impressed you the most that really made you purchase that product?
Absolutely.
I've been that customer in the booth.
Yeah.
Did you get paid in coconut oil?
Yeah, no. In coconut oil.
Nope. Got paid nothing.
Yeah.
Heck, I didn't even get to attend the show because I was too busy in the damn booth.
All right, so Ron, we have 3 minutes.
RSA was all about encryption, and you'll see very little encryption at the show this year.
Well, what's funny is, I think it was Sam that was asking me, she's like, so RSA, she's like, I thought it was a conference. She's like, is it a company too? Like the company itself and the conference have gotten so big that it's hard for an outsider to look at it and go, oh, wait a minute, hold on. So what was the beginning? The RSA, the company created the conference, and it kind of grew so large that it's almost indistinguishable from each other.
Yeah, so the RSA company, a lot of people will know them for the people who did the two-factor physical authentication pins, and that's but they've got a bunch of other products, NetWitness, they've got Archer, they've got a bunch of different solutions, which is very interesting. And you'll see them probably prominently at the beginning of one of the vendor halls. But the world has kind of moved. Encryption didn't solve everything.
Yeah,
it could, but it hasn't. You'll probably see some crypto products there, but not a lot. And I would just like to talk about the origins of stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Well, Ron, I think blockchain is going to solve everything now, right? You got to move to the new word.
The new word is blockchain.
Yeah.
So you'll be there.
Well, I'm having a couple meetings with some crypto people, mostly talking about quantum cryptography. So it's there. It's just small.
I've actually spent some time with some quantum computing companies, and I still don't understand what they do. And I asked for example code, and I didn't see any.
Yeah.
But they tell me they can solve the traveling salesman problem in like 2 blinks of an atom or something like that. So.
Interesting. So you'll be walking the show floor with Cindy, your wife?
Yes, Cindy, believe it or not. So we're doing all the investing together at Gula Tech Adventures. She's never been to an RSA. She's been to DEF CON, she's been to Black Hat, been to a bunch of security conferences, never been to RSA. So she's my date for RSA, which is good.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, if you see Ron and Cindy walking the show floor, make sure you say hi. What's that, Jeff?
I was going to say, tell her to bring like a really large.
I was just lamenting
like,
I was Ron State last year.
I was going to say, make sure she collects as many shirts as possible. They make really nice quilts.
There you go.
If you know, after the fact.
Plus, if Cindy didn't come, there'd only be like 10 women at RSA. So,
yeah, there's that problem. Problem as well.
Yeah. Which is
going back to the hot wing thing. The line for the bathroom could be an issue for the men's room.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. Well, Ron, thank you very much for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly. Ron pre-recorded a couple of interviews for our other shows today as well, so look for that coming up. We talked about very different topics. And again, Ron, thank you for coming on, talking about RSA. It was a good pre-game. Jeff's going to come on, and we're going to do the post-game on various shows on the network, as Jeff will be there, as Doug White will be presenting as well. So with that, we'll take a short break, come back. Technical segment and security news still to come. Stay tuned.